Hello and welcome to the video. Today we're going to talk about Start With Why by Sinek. And this is a book that I've been really excited to bring to you because it is a very popular book and there's a great TED Talk that goes along with it. But I feel like it's popular for a reason. I feel like starting with why and helping people find their why is something that is so important in so many different aspects of life. Whether it's marketing for your business, which is something that Simon talks about quite a lot, whether it's finding your own personal why for your own personal life, which I think again is very, very important, or whether it's being a leader and helping other people find their why, which again I think is talked about quite a lot in the book and is more important now than ever to be able to help people and show people how to find their why. So we're going to get right started and talk about why you should start with why, or why start with why, which is our first category. So start with why is about a naturally occurring pattern in human nature, a way of thinking, acting, and communicating that gives some leaders the ability to inspire those around them. And again, you can think of it not only as a leader, but you can think of it as a leader for yourself. Like Peter Drucker talks about in managing oneself, you're kind of the leader for yourself as well. And you can also think about it as it pertains to marketing, which really you're trying to lead people towards your product or your service or whatever you're trying to get them to buy. So there's countless examples of when a person, a company, or a movement succeeded against the odds because they started with why. So we'll talk about a few of them right now, but the Wright brothers, which if you don't know the story about the Wright brothers, it's definitely worth a read, but just a quick synopsis of it is the Wright brothers were just two brothers and they were not college educated. They didn't have a big budget to figure out how to be the first people to fly planes. They had a really great why. They really had passion about being the first people to be able to have a manned aircraft that could actually take flight. And because of that, they were the first people to actually get that first manned aircraft. And they were up against some pretty stiff competition. There were some people that were the head of different organizations, and there were some people that had a lot more funding than they had, but they didn't have the why. They wanted more of the success and the fame of being the first person to really get that plane off the ground. And the Wright brothers really just had that major passion to learn how to be the first people to get a plane off the ground. And then we could talk about Apple and Martin Luther King Jr., who both really started their companies from why. Apple doesn't necessarily, even to this day, make the best quality computers. Now, I might get some hate for this, but they don't necessarily make the best quality computers or best quality phones, but people really have identified with Apple. And that's really the power of starting with why, because Apple told their consumers who they were, and then their consumers kind of attached themselves to that, and then that's how they built their business. So those who start with why are able to create a following of people and get them to act not because they were swayed, but because they were inspired to act. And that's what I was talking about with Apple. They're not swaying you with low prices. They're not swaying you with having the best technology, quote unquote, but really they were inspiring us to buy from them, which is really, really different than what the majority of other companies are doing. And as I was talking about before, it's happening in all different sorts of sectors. It's happening in public space, it's happening in the private space, nonprofit, B2B, B2C, and those are all business-based ones. But like I said, it's also happening with ourselves. It's happening on a even smaller level, which is very, very interesting nowadays. With the advent of the internet, you can really categorize yourself by your why, or people will categorize you by their why. So we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit further into the map. Over 80% of people say they are not in their dream jobs today. So we're going to talk a little bit about not only the why of getting people to buy the product, but also the why of getting people to work for you and getting the best people to work for you in your organization. Learning to build an organization for why can help you inspire these people leading. So creating loyal employees and creating a shared vision for the organization and creating loyal customers, all of these pertain to business. And they really are helping enrich the people that are in business with those people, not only the customers, but also, like I said, the employees. And it can create more innovation, create more profit, and create a sustainable business. You might be thinking, why would the why create more innovation and more profit and a more sustainable business? it really goes back to exactly the same thing that Apple was talking about, because Apple didn't see itself as a computer company necessarily. They saw themselves as the technology company that was innovative, right? So because their why kind of included innovation, their employees are more likely to be the people who are already innovative, because that's the type of person that would want to go and work at Apple. But also their already innovative employees, are more likely to be innovative because that's part of their identity within the company. So you can see how they would be more innovative that way if part of your why is to be innovative. Creating more profit, very interesting, because you're going to have to spend a lot less money on advertising when you're coming from a real strong why, so your profit margins end up being quite a bit larger, as well as you're able to charge quite a bit more, and there's a bunch of other reasons why you're creating more profit in your business, because your customers are really connected with your why. And this kind of goes back to Jay Abraham's getting everything you can into all you got. You really have three ways to get new customers. You have obviously advertising, get new customers. You can get your current customers to buy more from you, and you can get them to buy more often, and all of which, starting from why, will be able to increase in one way or another. The other thing is that you can create a sustainable business. So you can see, as computers have really, I would expect that computer sales have probably gone down over the past few years at the very least, because people are using their smartphones more and more and more as really a personal computer in your hand. So you can see how much market share and how much sustainability Apple would have given up if they were just a computer company and they weren't focused on their why and their customers getting the best technology and being the innovator of the industry as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a world that doesn't start with why. And the number one thing that is blocking people from starting with why is that they're assuming that they already know. Behavior is affected by our assumptions or our perceived truths. We make decisions based on what we think we know. So here's the automakers example. American automakers use rubber mallets to hit doors into place at the end of the assembly line. These automakers started with the assumption that their doors need to be tapped at the end to ensure the quality. And this is a symptom of a bigger problem, but it's just kind of the one that we can easily see and we can easily make a metaphor for, or easily make an analogy of, that this symptom is a symptom of a bigger problem, of reacting to a problem instead of starting with a bigger picture of creating a product that doesn't need reacting to in the first place. And that's what the Japanese automakers are focused on. So they make ones that don't need to be hammered at the end of the line, exact same plants or exact same processes in these plants. So these automakers started with the assumption that their doors would need to fit perfectly in order to avoid needing an extra employee and a hammer. So you can see that their why really includes that, hey, we're going to make everything and engineer everything perfectly from the start. And extrapolate that one thing that includes the hammer out to the hundreds or thousands of times this assumption plays out. So different assumptions of, let's say that they need to engineer things perfectly versus they'll always need to have someone reacting to the problems in the first place. Extrapolate that out hundreds or thousands of times in that specific business. It plays out. These automakers in Japan saved time, they saved money, and they set themselves up for success with one simple change further ahead in the chain by adapting the idea that they would engineer so well that they would not need to double check their work. And the exact same thing could be done by these American automakers. There's nothing inherently better about the engineers that are happening in Japan than are in America. In fact, they're probably trained in a lot of the same places. But the ones in America were given the modus operandi to only make it so good that someone who could check that work would be able to check it. And these guys needed to engineer it so that it was perfect every single time. And you can see how that would play out over those hundreds of different times in a certain business. So the next part is carrots and sticks. Most businesses have no clue, and this one is so apparent if you're in advertising whatsoever, that most businesses have no clue why their customers are their customers, or for that matter, that their employees are their employees. They are making assumptions, like we talked about before. They're assuming they know based on an incomplete set of information. Or even worse, they're making assumptions based on information that is completely flawed. And the assumption that they're making in a lot of cases is that there are only two ways to motivate someone to become a customer or employee. They're assuming that they need to use the first way, which is manipulation. So manipulations are running rampant in all forms of sales and marketing, mostly because businesses have become reliant on them. So there's only two ways for someone to become a customer or an employee: manipulation and inspiration. We're going to go into manipulation here first. The manipulation form causes extra stress in both the buyer and the seller, and it leads to transactional sales and not loyalty. Really, it only works well for transactions that only happen once and not one time, and not reoccurring purchases. So if you're in a business and you are only getting people to buy something one time, it might not be that important for you not to rely on manipulation. Or if it's just a one-time transaction, manipulation does not work well for employees. It does not work well for recurring customers, and it doesn't necessarily even work well for people who are having one-time purchases but might refer you clients in the future. And again, if we go back to Jay Abraham, getting everything you can out of all you've got, really, you have to think of everyone in your circle, in your client book, in your customer book, as some type of a reoccurring customer. Either they are buying from you more than once, which is an ideal business in my opinion, or they're referring other customers to you, which really can be looked at as a second transaction as well. So very, very important not to run on manipulations when it comes to marketing and sales at the very least. So typical manipulations can include things like dropping price, promotions, using fear, and aspirational messaging. So this would be something like, don't you want to be super fit like this person? Things like that are a manipulation, because you're playing on people's worst aspects of themselves, and you're trying to get them to feel bad about themselves in order to buy a product from you. These other ones are fairly self-explanatory, and almost every single marketing message that you're seeing nowadays, other than people like Apple, like we talked about before, Apple's really not doing it, and you're seeing other companies trying to adopt what Apple is doing, but it's very, very difficult for them to do. So all of these manipulations don't breed loyalty and actually train customers and employees to look at you for your manipulations instead of to trust you. And actually, the automaker example is fairly timely as well, because you could see the American automakers when they really were hit hard a few years ago, because they were so used to giving people a cash rebate. And when they had to stop doing that in order to be able to start making a profit, you noticed that they were really struggling. And some of the Japanese and other foreign automakers weren't struggling so bad because they never offered that manipulation. They just offered really great products, I would say. And that might be an oversimplification. The next way that you can motivate people, and the one that we want to focus on, is inspiration. And the rest of the book is based on learning about how to inspire customers, followers, and employees. And I would say that you could even adapt the book to inspire yourself through using maybe some of the techniques in What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by Dr. Shad. Very, very good book. I'll leave a link for that down below. So here's an alternative perspective. And like I said, the rest of the book is really about starting with why. And this is really all about here. We learned why we should start with why. We learned that some of the best companies and people that inspired great movements have really used kind of a message that all started with why. All their messaging started with why. And then we talked about a world that now doesn't start with why. So it's really a less competitive marketplace, because all of your current competitors are probably using one of these two manipulations, or one of these manipulations like the carrots and the sticks. And a lot of the time when you're in business, you're just assuming that you have to do things in a certain way. But really, if you start with why, it opens you up to being able to be more innovative when it comes to business at the very least. So here we'll talk about the golden circle, and that the golden circle is really finds an order and a predictability in human behavior. But it's simply, put simply, it helps understand why we do what we do. So the golden circle, we'll talk a little bit about it. We'll talk about the outer ring first, right? We'll talk about what first, which is the outer ring. It's products and services that your company sells. So it's basically what you do or what you deliver to your customer. And then we have an inner ring of the circle, which is kind of the middle ring. And this is about how you do what you do. And almost everyone knows what they do. If you offer a product or a service, it's pretty obvious what the product or service is. Almost everyone knows what that is. Very few people know how they're different from their competitors, right? So it's often referred to as a USP, or a unique selling proposition. Very few businesses go over that, which is obviously an important point, to be a little bit different than everyone else, and not only to be a little bit different, but also to know why you're different. And then the last ring that we'll talk about here is really the center of the circle. It's the why. It's what your purpose is, or cause, or your belief, and why does your company exist, and why should anyone care? And then we'll go right down to this statement here that's all throughout the book, which I think is very important and bears repeating again and again, is that people don't buy your what. They don't buy what your product or service is, because they could go to any number of people and they could get that same product or service. They could even potentially get a product or service that is cheaper, or they could potentially get a product or service that is better than your product or service. So no one really buys your product or service for your what. They might buy it for your how, but really what people are doing and they're craving right now is to buy why you do it more and more and more. So knowing your why isn't the only way to be successful, and sometimes you have to be first mover's advantage or something similar, but history shows us that knowing your why is the only way to create lasting success. So first mover's advantage is obviously a very, very big advantage, and sometimes it's hard to overcome if you're in an industry where people are investing a ton of money. So I would say that, if you don't have first mover's advantage, your best bet is to really develop a deep why. And that's almost every single industry nowadays. It's very hard to find something where you can really be a first mover or really have an innovation that completely radically shifts the industry. So instead of asking what we should do to compete, try asking why did we get started in the first place, and what can we do to bring our cause to life given our current technologies and opportunities. So this primes you for innovation. You're thinking of what right now, right? So all of the other people in your industry might be innovating new solutions to your problem, or they might be, again, competing based on some of those manipulations, right? Think about, for example, the furniture industry. You might have very small amounts of innovation in that industry, but really people are competing on price a lot in that industry and competing based on manipulations. But if you start thinking, why did I get into furniture in the first place? Let's say, for example, you got into furniture to be able to get into people's homes and help them design a beautiful living space so they can feel comfortable when they came home from work, which is a great reason to get into the business. You can think about, okay, not only do I provide furniture, but I'm going to provide that environment for people. I'm going to provide something that makes them feel like they can relax when they first get home. And you might think of a ton of different innovations for your industry just by asking that question. So you can see how that would make you different at not the what level. You might not change necessarily what you're offering, but it would change your level of the why, and you might change your product or service a little bit based on your why, or you might change your how a little bit based on your why. So the golden circle is really not opinion. It really is biology. It's basically the way that the human brain works. And when human beings feel a sense of belonging, we feel connected and safe. And we crave that feeling and we seek it out. That's very interesting that human beings are working this way, and that we can extrapolate that out into how to use it for marketing and how to motivate ourselves and all sorts of those things. And as is the case with a lot of truths, it really kind of can be seen in a lot of different ways, and this one is seen in biology as well. So because of our natural need to belong, we have a sense for when things don't belong, and we get that feeling that simply isn't right before we even look at the what of the company. And this is really interesting. I think in the book he talks about HP, and maybe I could be wrong about that, but HP tried to come out with an iPod competitor, let's say. But because Apple had already been in the space and had their why so well established, that 1,000 songs in your pocket, so that is a really great why for a business, let's say. HP tried to come out, and honestly, their MP3 player could have been better than the iPod, but they were no one even knows the name. I can't even remember the name, let alone if it was really the company HP or not, of that MP3 player. And that's simply because they didn't have a very strong why. HP is thought of, for me, as a cheap laptop company. And because of that, I'm not looking forward to them getting into any other industries. Whereas with Apple, once they innovate, if it connects deeply with the why that I feel Apple already has, and I connect with the why that Apple already has, I'm willing to buy the next thing. So because of our natural need to belong, we are drawn to leaders and organizations that are good at articulating their why. Their ability to make us feel like we belong, to make us feel special, safe, and not alone is part of what gives them the ability to inspire us. Look at Apple. They are arguably the best in the world at this. They constantly show how the individuals they serve are different. Because of that, those individuals connect with them at a deep level. They rarely even focus on the what of their business. Like I said before, the products of Apple and the services of Apple are not that much different than their competitors, and arguably could be less than what their competitors are currently offering. So they don't focus on computer specs, phones, or other tech. All the other companies are focusing on, all the other companies advertising are focusing on the technology behind those things. But really, Apple is focusing on their customers and how they connect with the company, and that's very interesting. So like I said, some may say Apple even has lesser quality products, but they have built such a cult-like following that they continue to be one of the biggest companies in the entire world. I think they are the second biggest company in the entire world, other than Amazon, and they could be actually the first $1 trillion company, I believe. So we'll talk about a little bit more about biology here. It's why, how. It really relates to your limbic brain. And if you know anything about the anatomy of the brain, your limbic brain kind of relates to gut decisions, and it really is an older part of the brain, and it's really what all animals are running on, or a lot of animals are running on an everyday basis. If something doesn't feel right, it happens in your gut, and it doesn't even move into the neocortex. You don't even have a chance to think about the technology part of it if it doesn't feel right. And that's what I was talking about with the HP MP3 player. It just doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't feel right to me that HP would come out with a great quality MP3 player. And it really is where trust and loyalty is created. So that's on the why and how level. I should say why and how level here. So the what level is really, really interesting. It relates to your neocortex, and that's kind of the outer part of the brain. It's responsible for rational and analytical thought and language. It doesn't matter if people don't feel safe with your company. Again, people need to feel safe. They need to trust you. They need to feel loyal. They need to be able to get past that gut decision on your company before you can even talk to them about the features of your specific product or service. So very, very interesting how the golden circle really relates to biology. You got your why and your how part of your golden circle as part of your limbic brain. You need to, not only do people need to know why, but they need to know how you do it, that your product is a good quality, let's say. And then the outer circle of your what, it really relates to that neocortex, which is the more analytical part of the human brain. So the next part we'll talk about is clarity, discipline, and consistency. So you need to have clarity of why. This is the first part that you should start with. Not only, let's continue to talk about this in a business sense, which you should start your business with a clear sense of why, but also you should start with trying to inspire other people by having a clarity of your why. That's where you should be starting first. If you're creating a speech, if you're doing a video book similar to what I'm doing, you should have a reason why you're doing that. And also with yourself, you should have a clarity of why for yourself. Why are you doing what you're doing on an everyday basis? So it's very, very interesting how you can extrapolate this into multiple different areas. Everything starts with clarity of why. How can you expect people to buy, vote, or follow you, or even to follow yourself, if you can't tell them why they should? And it just seems so obvious when you put it into a sentence like that. But again, most people don't have any idea what their why is for their business, for their personal brand, for themselves, anything. And manipulations can motivate an outcome, but they can't get people to willingly follow you. Most success requires that you build a loyal following. That's true in business, that's true in politics, that's true in even the game of YouTube. Very, very important to build a loyal following, and now more than ever. And inspiring a loyal following starts with clarity of why. And the next part that we need is a discipline of the how. So first we start with the clarity of why and discipline of the how. Very interesting. How we do things manifests itself in the system and processes that we create within our organizations, or for example, the systems and values and beliefs that we create if we are some sort of a leader, like a political leader or any of those things. Ironically, the why, which is the most important part of the equation, is actually easier to understand than the how. Very important point here, that the why, if you watch my video on Ikigai, which I'll leave a link for down below, but with Ikigai, it's very easy to find your Ikigai. All you have to do is shut out some of the external programming that's coming into your brain for a little while, and you will naturally gravitate towards your why, or your Ikigai in that case. So the why is much easier to find than the how. The how requires discipline to never veer from your cause, to hold yourself accountable to how you do things is the hardest part. So this is the hardest part of the whole process, is the how. Very important to start with the why, but the how is the hardest part. And that's because how isn't a noun, it's a verb. How as a noun, let's talk about that. So integrity, innovation, honesty, nouns are things. So you'd see that's maybe like a mission statement. We go try and have integrity at all times and be completely honest with our customers, etc. Right? That's how as a noun. You can't build systems or follow nouns, right? A little more integrity today, Bob, doesn't give you much direction, if that makes sense. But if you use how as a verb, something like always do the right thing would be integrity, or look at things from a different perspective, that would be innovation. Always tell the truth would be honesty. Verbs inspire action, so you can see how as an action actually how as a verb inspires action to people. And when how is written as a verb, how can be put into a system and practiced. You can put this into a mission statement of always do the right thing, or multiple mission statements potentially in your company, and look at things from a different perspective and always tell the truth. And those could be things that your company does. Whereas integrity is not something that your company does. It's something that your company says that it has. That's an important distinction as well. It's very important to keep yourself on track with these hows as a verb as well. Once you've figured out what your why is, you also need to figure out what your how is, and then keep yourself disciplined in order to continue to follow them. So the next part we're going to talk about is consistency of what. Everything you do and say has to provide has to prove what you believe in order to connect with your following. So this looks like authenticity when practiced in the real world. Companies often go against their why, and when they find a new what that looks profitable, but if it doesn't connect with their why, it's inauthentic, and their following, inauthentic to their following, and even outside can see that. Even people outside can see that. So that is, again, the same example of the HP. It was totally inauthentic. To me, again, whether they believe this or not, they haven't articulated it well enough to me. HP is a low-budget computer company. That's what I feel like they are. And because of that, it doesn't make sense for them to come out with an MP3 player. And I don't feel safe buying an MP3 player from them, because I don't believe that they are really in it for the right reasons. I believe that they probably got in it because they think, hey, that's probably the most profitable thing that we can do right now. Let's see, Apple can do it really well. Let's see if we can get into the same industry that they can, because they seem to be doing so well in the iPod industry, right? So for me, it feels like, hey, this guy's going for profit, and I don't trust it. The next part we're going to talk about is how to rally those who believe. So you want to start with why, but know your how. Again, that's what we talked about before. It's important to start with the why, but you have to know your how. Energy excites, and charisma inspires. So first, we're going to talk about energy. The energy is motivating. It's easy to see, measure, and copy. If someone's excited about something, you can see it, and it's in their voice, it's in their mannerisms, but it's not useful for long-term growth. And I think what he's talking about specifically here is you can excite someone into something, but you're not going to excite someone into change. You're not going to excite someone into being a long-term customer. It's just not going to happen. But charisma, that is what's going to inspire people. It's hard to see. It's impossible to measure and to copy for sure, but you know it when you see it. It's a gut feeling. Charisma has nothing to do with energy. It comes down to a very clear sense of why. So it manifests as an absolute conviction to something bigger than yourself. Look at Bill Gates, for example. Bill Gates doesn't have very much energy whatsoever. He's introverted and not very energetic, but he has motivated almost 80,000 people who worked for him and the millions who bought his products through his conviction to something bigger than himself. And that was really his conviction to building Microsoft into that really great company and making personal computers for people, which is very, very interesting. And you can see, just as a quick side note, you can see, again, same thing. Bill Gates is an amazing philanthropist right now, right? He has just shifted his why, his own personal why, from his business into philanthropy. And there is so many people. He got some of the richest people in the entire world to basically say, I'm going to give away 80% of my wealth. I'm going to leave less than 20% of my wealth to my family, and the rest of it is going to different types of charities. Do you think he could have excited people into giving away billions and billions of dollars? No, it's charisma. It's him having a deep sense of why, his conviction of why, that he could talk those billionaires into doing things like that. Very interesting. So the next part that we're going to talk about is the golden hierarchy. So we're starting with why, but we got to know the how. Now we're moving away from the golden circle that we talked about before, from up here, which is basically a circle of 3 different rings. And now we're going to turn it into a pyramid. So the golden circle is really just the top view of the golden, which is a cone-shaped Y at the top. So not a pyramid, a cone, my bad. And how in the middle, and then what at the base. So it's an easy way to show how the golden circle works in larger organizations. So we'll start right from the bottom. We'll start from the what. So the what part of it is the majority of employees. And this is where all the tangible stuff actually happens, right? Products are made and services are rendered, et cetera, et cetera. And it must be in congruence with the why and the how level, and which is only being accomplished by the how of the systems and processes being in place. Very interesting, right? So you can see that all the services and products are the what. And then in the middle, we talk about the senior executives. These are inspired by the leader's vision, and they get to work at bringing it to life using their skills. The why is just a belief, and the how are the actual actions that make that belief possible. And now we'll talk about the why, which is basically the CEO, the leaders, and they live and embody the why, and they use their charisma to motivate people who live in the how. Very few people are really why people and living from a sense of higher purpose. Most are living in the how dimension, even if they are in the top of the hierarchy in their particular organization. And I would say if you're in a single person company or in a much smaller organization than this, it can be useful for you to think about yourself in these different roles. Think about yourself in the why. Think about yourself in the how. Think about yourself in the what at different times of the business, at different times of the week, at different times of the day. It can be very important to think of yourself in these different roles so that you make sure that you're not just playing out the one role. Those people who know the why need people who know how and can do the what. And that's very interesting because a lot of entrepreneurs and single person entrepreneurs feel like they are the people that know the why, but they have a hard time finding people that can do the how and the what part of it. And sometimes if you're a single person business, you need to be able to figure out how to do all 3 of them by yourself. So the second part of how to rally those who believe, you know your why, you know your how, and now what are you going to do? What you do changes over time. And as the market changes and technology and opportunities do, but your why will never change. And it might shift slightly and might be kind of a moving target, kind of like the ikigai that we talked about before, but it's never going to completely change based on the whim of the market. It's never going to change because of the market. And your what's must always be authentic to your why, like we talked about before with the MP3 player. Just because the market is shifting into a specific area that might be more profitable at the time doesn't mean that your company should pursue that if it doesn't connect with your why, and especially if you can't get your marketing message to connect it to your why. So people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. but it's all happening at the what level. We talked about that before, but people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. But you have to make people understand your why at the what level, if that makes any sense. So all things happening at the what level must clearly represent why the company exists. So everything that's happening at the what level must clearly express your why. So we create products and services for people who believe what we believe. And that's really what the connection of Apple is. Again, it's not really necessarily that we believe that we Apple has the best products, etc., etc. Like I said before, it really is all about, I really believe that I am different, and therefore I'm going to buy a Mac because Macs are different, and they're creative, and etc., etc. Right? And the products are showing me that Apple is different. They're creative. They're almost hipsterish, basically, right? And what people believe. And if we continue to do that and communicate it clearly, we will always have an audience. Again, if you continue to connect your what to your why, and you can continue to get an audience to see that, you're always going to have an audience out there. And once you build up a customer one time, you're going to have a customer for life. So now we're going to talk about how you can discover your why. We kind of showed you why it's so important to start with why, and why it's a major advantage in business, and if you're trying to be a leader at all, to start with why. And then we talked about that alternative perspective and exactly how the cycle of why, how what really works, and how to build out either a company or a following based on that. And then we talked a little bit more about how to rally those who believe, which is basically exactly how an organization works. And we really talked about charisma as well. And now we're going to talk about how you can find your why. So the origins of why. Why doesn't come from looking into the future. Why comes from looking back at your past. So again, same thing with Ikigai. It's about it doesn't come from market research, and it doesn't come from interviews. You can't find it somewhere. You can't go out and look for your Ikigai or your why. But if you look back and you find your why you started doing what you're doing right now, and really go back and learn, okay, not did I start this because I thought it was going to be profitable. Think about why you got into what you're doing for the first reason. There had to be a reason why you got into it, and that's often what your why is. So it's potentially helpful questions that aren't in the book here. Why did I start doing what I'm doing now? What has helped me in the past? And who do I want to help? And how can I connect to them specifically? And often this kind of starts from, if you're a single person business, what do I need? And how can I help myself? And therefore, probably other people are going to need the same thing. So again, finding your why isn't really the hard part. Once you go back and you think about those questions and you take the time to meditate on it, often it's just getting rid of a lot of what that you've piled on top of your why. Very interesting. You've tried to think of things that were going to be profitable and et cetera, et cetera. And what you need to do is really go back and connect more with your why, and find the things that are connected to your why that you can provide as products and services that are going to help the people that also believe what you believe. So when you compete against everyone else, no one wants to help you. Very interesting here, right? If you're offering the same product or service as a million different competitors in the space, and your only major selling point is, I'm going to charge you less money, people are going to be way less likely to buy from you. And at the very least, they're going to be way more likely to ask for more money off than you are currently offering. And when you compete against yourself, everyone else is on your side and wants to help. So here's maybe a better explanation of it. Don't compete with your competition on how and what. Before the people you want to work with know your why. Because after they know your why, if they can connect with it, they'll want to help you too. So very interesting. They may be even willing to pay a higher price and endure a burden the other company wouldn't have to put them through, or etc. Like people do with a lot of the companies mentioned in this book, right? Apple, Harley, Southwest Airline. Apple's going to cost you more money. A Harley, you have to wait an extremely long amount of time to get a Harley. Something crazy to wait to get a Harley. It was like a year or 6 months or something like that for basically an auto manufacturer is amazing. But really what you need to do is make sure that before people are asking the what's about your product, your service, your prices, etc., make sure they know your why. It's not even worth trying to sell them or trying to market to them if they don't understand what your why is. And this can be really helpful if you're a consultant or if you're offering any kind of product or services. Very important. Make sure that people know your why. And another point that he talks about in the book that I didn't include here is be okay with walking away if someone doesn't connect with your why. If your why doesn't fit well with that company's why, that's great. Just go ahead and move on. Don't even necessarily offer to work with them if you have the ability to turn down that work. Try and make sure that they connect with your why, because those are going to be the best customers. They're going to be the ones that pay on time. They're going to be the ones that are going to pay you the most, and they're going to give you the least amount of hassle. So that is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. Very exciting book. I'm happy to have brought it to you, and I'm really looking forward to bringing the next one. Thanks a lot.